Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting of the State Board of Canvassers and State Board of Elections here on December 15th, 2015. I am Peter Kucinski. To my right is Douglas Kellner. To his right is Andrew Spano. And on the screen, who is with us by video, is Greg Peterson. Commissioner Peterson is recovering from some surgery and was not able to make the trip to Albany today, but he will be participating through a video conference. So we'll open up the meeting with the Board of Canvassers for purposes of certifying the November election. And
I move that we adopt the canvass reports that have been prepared by the staff and that we sign the certifications.
do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
So that's unanimous. So we will now, and Commissioner Peterson, I understand these were sent to you and you have signed and are sending them back as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Happened today.
Okay, so we'll send, well, we'll sign ours here and then you can have yours attached to what we've signed.
So you're working now on the 3 statewide propositions.
Okay. So we have a separate certification for each one, right?
Correct.
That's for you. Bob, that's for you. That's done.
Done.
Next is the Supreme Court justices. There's 2 spots to sign the proc and the last page of the results. This one is the state senate, so there's 2 spots. The next is the unexpired term of the state senate seat, and then this is the 27th, the 71st assembly seat.
Did I sign everything? No? Sorry.
There's 2 spots on this one.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes.
All right, then I will make a motion, or I will entertain a motion to close the meeting of the Board of Canvassers.
So moved.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we will now open as a Board of Commissioners, as the Commissioners of the State Board of Elections. And our first order of business is minutes from the meeting of October 23rd. We have two sets of minutes. One are the public minutes. I would entertain a motion to adopt those.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, those are adopted. I believe on the executive committee minutes, there's still some differences regarding the minutes themselves, so we don't have those to adopt. However, I do think that the executive committee or the executive session last meeting was important in the sense that a discussion was held regarding, I believe, a policy issue that this board was entertaining in the context of a matter that was brought to us by the Enforcement Council. It's my belief that that discussion is something that deserves to be released publicly because I think it impacts a policy that this board is now engaged in based upon the vote that was taken at the meeting that I think deserves to be known by the public. I think from my perspective, it was a change in policy regarding the issue that was brought to us by the Enforcement Council. In that context, I think it would be beneficial to the public to have the transcript of that executive session released publicly. In addition, I think that the document that was under discussion in the context of that meeting should also be disclosed so that people who can look at the discussion that was held and the vote that was held would have context that they could put it in so they would understand the import. I believe that that discussion and vote has to the general public. I think that that goes well beyond the instant matter that was before us at that time because I think the nature of it would impact potentially a number of people in the state who are engaged in different discussions around the state regarding public officials. So I would like the board, and I think this would go along with a policy that we adopted, I believe back in March. It was a policy where we determined that it would, with a vote of 3 commissioners, if a rule, regulation, or policy consideration is undertaken at a executive session that deserves public disclosure, that would warrant the disclosing of that information. And I think the best way to do it in this context would be through the transcript because I think it would lay out very clearly the discussion and it would lay out very clearly what the considerations were that this board undertook in entertaining that particular request from the independent counsel. So I would like to put that out there. I would ask for, if there's discussion, also a motion. If anyone would like to make one that we do that, it would take 3 votes of this commission, of this board to do it. So with that in mind, I would entertain any discussion by any of the commissioners regarding that issue. There's no discussion?
Well, let me just say that I'm in favor of transparency. And as you know, I voted against that confidentiality policy because I thought it was too restrictive. And the idea that some things get released and others don't without a clear understanding of what the standards are when we're going to make it public is troubling to me. So that's my biggest concern, is I want assurance that it's going to apply generally and not just to this one case.
Well, my belief is that if you look at our
Or
policy.
these 2 cases, because I guess it's 2. There are 2 cases that.
I believe if you look at the policy that we did adopt back in, I believe it was March of this year, does have a standard that speaks to if there's a, as I mentioned earlier, a rule, regulation, or policy consideration would warrant this being done in public, that would constitute something that should be done in the public realm. So I think we set a standard in that policy. I know at the time that was somewhat, that was discussed, and Commissioner, I understand your position as far as making it more transparent, but I think that there was a standard that was adopted. I think this particular issue fits directly into that standard in the sense that there's a policy consideration that's at play here that came up in the context of that particular discussion. I think it's very important that the public be aware. I think, as a board, it's important for us to make sure the public is aware whenever we take a position on an issue that is in the public domain that changes, I think, what has been a longstanding policy so that they're aware of what it is. I don't think it's fair to the public to have them in a position where they're not aware that a different policy is being implemented and they're not aware of it, and that would then potentially put them in harm's way, that they might violate a particular interpretation that we've made because they didn't know what the interpretation was. And I don't think that's fair to them. I think that's why we do opinions. And as you know, there's another consideration today about an opinion on an issue. I think that's one way we do it, but I think another way we've been doing it is in the context of enforcement matters. And I'm not going to disagree with you, Commissioner, that there may be other instances where that type of issue is warranted. I think this is one. If there are others, I think those should also be considered for public disclosure, because I think it's very important that we make the public aware. As I said, I don't think it's fair to change a policy and then not have people know about it.
I don't agree with your characterization that it's a change of policy, but I tend to agree with your principles, that the transparency is important.
But I don't think this is a change in policy at all.
Well, maybe people can take that.
Right.
Maybe people can, consider that for their own purposes when they see the transcript, and I'm willing to, put that out there with that.
So maybe the thing,
thought in mind.
The transcript that I saw yesterday has a lot of typos in it, particularly with my remarks. So I'm not going to agree to release that transcript. And then there's the question of whether we should take out the names and places so that we're not actually disclosing what it is that we're investigating. Does Ms. Sugarman have a view on it?
Well, Commissioner, you know that I was opposed to the policy as it was passed back on March 13th. I don't believe that any discussion that was had during an executive session should be released. I don't believe that this was a change in policy. I believe that there's an investigation that's being conducted. That investigation is still going on. To release a transcript while an investigation is taking place, I think it causes the integrity not only of the specific investigation that's being conducted, but the integrity of the ability of my division to assure that people who come forward to make complaints about incidents that are going on across the state and allow my division to conduct an investigation is severely hampered. To say that what a request for subpoena changes a policy, I know that was the feeling of Commissioner Kozinski. I don't believe that was a feeling of the other three commissioners. I would vehemently oppose any kind of release of the discussion that was had during what I view as executive session confidentiality. And if that's what is the consideration here, I found out about this at 5:30 last night, doesn't give me the opportunity to consider whether there's an ability for me to take any kind of action to prohibit this. I don't know whether there would be an ability for me to go to court and try to stop the commissioner's actions. To do it within 18 hours. After that, when there is an ongoing investigation being conducted, I would just ask that no action be taken. And you know my position about revealing what goes on during the course of one of my investigations. I think that it, as I said, hampers any conduct that I could do in ensuring that people could come forward and making complaints and allowing me to come to the board and asking for authority under the statute to further my investigation by getting information through subpoenas.
Have the subpoenas been served?
Yes.
And have they provided responses?
Not yet, and I would indicate that any kind of a subpoena that's served in this matter without indicating the place that are subpoenas, the subpoenas, the persons subject to the subpoenas would have to be notified. So if they felt that they wanted to move to quash those subpoenas, they could have done that, and they haven't done that so far.
That's what I meant.
Well, let me just say, I don't know what relevance whether they move to quash or not has to our discussion. Our discussion, in my view, is really centered on our responsibility as a board to make sure that the public is informed and has fair opportunity to know what the rules are. I think that that's my goal. My goal is to make sure that people who are at least potentially under the jurisdiction of this agency have the knowledge they need to act appropriately when they're engaged in different activities out there. I think this particular case is very important on that principle, to make sure people are aware that these are the rules and these are the rules you have to follow. And I think that the discussion that was held during that particular meeting would go a long ways towards
Well, I agree
giving
with
that information.
I agree with that, but I don't know that we have to disclose who's involved in order to do that. That we could redact, make substantial redactions and accomplish that goal. It would be similar to having an opinion. And I've long felt, so I'm inclined to do it if we can redact it in a way that doesn't disclose the actual individuals that are involved.
We had a lengthy discussion at that, and you were the only one that thought it was a change in policy. And you could be right. I mean, there's plenty of times when one person's right, everybody else is wrong. But I think based on the long discussion that we had and the sincere effort everyone made to come to a conclusion, that I'm not against releasing this, but I agree with Doug that just redact the names of the case people, and then you know, I would consider it.
The Commission on Judicial Ethics gives out opinions frequently. And they have what I regard as an excellent publication that just has 2-line squibs on every opinion that they give out. And indeed, we don't agree with everything that they have concluded with respect to judicial campaigns, but it's a very helpful publication. And I wish we could do something similar to that so that people have guidance over what's going on. You know, and I'm very disappointed that Enforcement Council does not disclose any information about complaints so that nobody has any idea what the rules are and why some people get investigated and others don't get investigated. That's very troubling. So I'm inclined to agree with you, Commissioner, but I think what we have to do is scrub it. And so that the public will know what the issue is, you know, what conduct generated an investigation without disclosing the details of the investigation.
If I could be heard very carefully or briefly, I want to be very careful in how I say this. I think there's a secondary issue besides just names in the transcript, which is that specific words were at issue that could be identifying, and the thought comes over me that if those were also removed, that there may not be enough left of the transcript to be
You have to
intelligible.
leave the words in, but you have to scrub it.
If you left the words in, they may well be identifying.
Well, if I could just be here too, and not to, I was gonna say it anyway, but I believe the subject of this was already a newspaper article and the target was unknown. The target wasn't identified, that was the whole point. And the basis for that was a newspaper article, which is already public. So it seems as though it's almost a perfect scenario
Well,
when,
so let's
There are
exchange drafts of what we're willing to.
Okay.
Yep. I mean,
the
I
two
tend to.
parts of the subpoena though. There are two parts to this. One was public, one was not. I think everyone agreed on one part, so that should be
It's the, I think it's the
easier
public
redaction.
part that we're discussing here. I agree with Kim. I think that the issue that was really at dispute here was the public document that was out there. I think it was done maybe on Facebook. Or
I'm
some
not gonna
pub-
comment on that, Commissioner, because
You don't have to comment at all. That's okay. That the, you know, it was done in a very public way. So I don't think we would
Right.
be asking you to disclose something that was done confidentially, and we'd be disclosing with something that was out there in the
Right.
public
So
realm
let's-
already. So I don't think it would
Let's just review what we're
compromise.
doing.
Fair enough.
There are two parts. One is the transcript, and then the other is the memorandum.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Doug?
There were two parts to your motion. One is the transcript of our discussion, and the other is the memorandum prepared by
Well,
Enforcement Council.
I'm not even necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about the document that was given to the commissioners as part of the submission, not necessarily the memo, but the document that was discussed, I think needs to be disclosed, so there's a context.
public ad.
So the discussion that was had at the meeting is given context by, this is the document we were discussing. So I'm not necessarily talking about the memorandum that was given to
The
us.
attachment, you mean?
It's the attachment you gave us, which was the subject matter, I'll call, of the
Well, I'll look at it.
discussion. That, I think, should be released, because I think without that, the discussion that was held at the meeting wouldn't have context. You really wouldn't understand what we were talking about. You need to be able to see that document in order to understand what I think is the import
Well,
of the
except that
discussion.
does then fully disclose the investigation.
Well, it does, but again, this was a public document.
Which isn't the end of the world to me.
Right,
I don't know
right.
that these investigations should be secret. But I'm troubled about doing it in some and not all.
Well, I'm willing to entertain others, don't get me wrong, but I think this one to me just was of such import that I felt it needs to be disclosed, because without it, I feel it's unfair
That
to.
people can get snagged.
They can get
because they
snagged in
don't-
ways they never
don't know that
anticipated.
This is something that.
And they
I
should
think
be
we're
aware
all
of
on
it.
the same boat.
That's all. They should know the rules.
Yeah.
They should
So-
know the rules.
But I think finding a way to do this. is-
Well, I think if we can look at it, if there's some confidential information that needs to be redacted, I think we can look at that. But to me, I'm not sure what that is, to be honest.
Right.
Maybe there is,
Well,
but
let's exchange drafts and let's keep Ms. Sugarman in the loop so that she's copied on all these exchanges.
Commissioner Peterson, do you have any particular thoughts? Are you comfortable with the way we're going on this?
Well, frankly, I agree with you. There are certain times when we are in executive session and something of a major discourse is transpiring where clarification is important for the public. And without interfering in any way, shape, or form with the enforcement officer's ability to pursue a case, there are interpretations which have come forward when we have those discussions. And I believe under those circumstances, and it can be redacted minutes or whatever, that should be available to the public so they can understand not only the letter of the law, but our interpretation of it. We may have a different interpretation than the enforcement officer, and frankly, we are the Board of Elections of the state of New York, and I think it's important that the elected officials that run for office and those who support them and their treasurers should understand what we're talking about so they don't take a leap in the wrong direction. I think that kind of disclosure is important. It's a very valid point to have brought up.
Okay. Then I think there's general agreement with the four commissioners in the direction we're going. So I would ask if staff could look at the documents, I guess maybe Brian and Kim, and come up with some proposal to us as to what would be appropriate for release. But I think you get the general direction that we're headed, and I think that's a good.
Yes, hopefully we can agree at a staff level and get it to you sooner than later.
That'd be great.
But as you do that, please.
Yes, keeping the enforcement council in the loop, I think, is warranted.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, so we don't actually have minutes at that, but if we release the transcript, I'm thinking minutes become sort of easier.
Those are the minutes.
Yeah, I think they're easy, right. There are no real minutes necessary then. Which is another discussion I'll just raise for your consideration. You know, we're doing minutes for our open sessions too. And as you know, these are being videotaped and put out there for public purposes. I'm not sure why we're doing minutes exactly, because if somebody wants to know what we did at a board meeting, it seems to me the way to do it is you go to a YouTube site, you see our meeting, and you can see just what we did. But
To that point, the minutes can be very short as a summary because of the transcript. But very troubling to me is that often the minutes don't have the actual documents that we adopted or voted on attached to the minutes. And I think that that's very important that if we vote a resolution, the text of the resolution should either be in the minutes or attached to the minutes. And I think they need to pay special attention to that.
I think that's fair enough. I don't know if that happens when they actually.
So for example, the minutes we adopted today
Right.
say the guest list is attached, but I never got the guest list. So I did vote on approving those minutes that have a guest list attached to them, but I've never seen the guest list. I was, you know, I didn't want to make a big deal over it at the time, but it's not really the right way to do it.
Okay, well then I think probably for the future, if we're going to continue to do minutes, whatever documents are associated with the minutes should be attached to the minutes when you're submitting them for approval.
And when you're publishing them.
And when you're publishing them. Do you publish them? Are they actually
Yeah,
published?
they're PDFs that are on the website.
Okay, so those are out there.
So the audio
Also-
transcript of the meeting is put up like after it's gone through.
Okay.
Transcribing.
Okay.
The agenda is up, and then finally, when
And
you
finally
adopt the minutes, they're up.
Okay, duly noted.
Minutes are up.
All right, so that concludes the first item, the minutes. And we'll go on to unit updates. Executive, Bob Bremen, Todd Valentine.
Well, I mean, certification and the completion of the election was the primary goal for what we've been working on for this meeting. You know, we're awaiting, looking ahead, we're awaiting still release of the budget. I mean, we submitted the budget that we asked for to cover a lot of additional cybersecurity needs that we think are necessary. So we'll be looking forward to that. I don't know.
Well, we've had a number of, certainly the meetings with regard to the election, and a number of us get calls as we, election day itself, we had prepared for similar to 2016 in case of any attacks, and luckily none came through that day, but we did have the assistance of a number of other state agencies and operatives and our IT people, so that went well. We continue to have conversations with the various associations and groups that are involved in standing up the national conversation on how we can interact with the classification of voting equipment as a key infrastructure. And certainly we're looking for the budget. There have been a number of conversations with counties. Surprisingly, there were a lot of very close elections that came to ties. A lot of winners based on write-ins and because it's such a local election cycle. So there's a lot of conversations out there that have taken place over that time. We're working on a number of procurements that are in the process of aging that need to be renewed. Our voting system testing lab is one of them that will be aging out, so we need to go out with a procurement to have in place a testing laboratory. We completed the procurement for the voter registration applications themselves. As you know, we had an issue with our previous vendor. We discontinued them, and we have put in place a new vendor. We're looking at a number of others. The asset tracking vendor that we have, through some careful reading of our staff, OGS thought that contract was over in April, but based on actually reading the words of the contract, we brought to their attention that it's really 2019 that the contract is through. So they're adjusting some of those items. But there's a number of procurements that are ongoing, as well as our IT staff will give an update on the various projects for Nysboe and CAPAS, the candidate management and the financial management system. We did get since the last meeting, the calendar set at the federal level, so certainly Todd and I sent that communication out, as we've done every even year, to the representatives at the congressional level, that part has happened, and sent it out to the counties. We do know that there's an issue with September's primary that we are continuing to have conversations. It falls on both 9/11 and the last day of Rosh Hashanah, so we know it needs to move. But
What's the first day to do petitions now for congressional seats?
oh, I didn't bring the
You remember?
calendar with me.
Is it not till it's March?
This
3
is the
months
cycle that we have to have 2 statewide conventions, one for federal candidates and then later for state candidates. So I know that is in February, so it must be first.
3 months before the primary.
March 6th or something like that. But it's posted on our website, if to be accurate.
But it's soon.
It's soon.
Well, it is.
It's very
It
soon.
is. People should be aware. I don't, most people are sensitive to that it's pretty soon.
So certainly the September, we get a lot of calls, is it set yet? But I don't know that they've settled on how they want to address it. So as soon as we know that, we'll get that notice out to all the counties so they can make the appropriate arrangements.
Okay. Anything else? Any questions for? No. Okay, then we'll move on to the council's office, Kim Galvin and Brian Quayle.
Well, Bob Brem stole my first item, which was that the federal calendar had been approved and is posted, and that we have issues with the September primary. So we have a lot of things, well, not a lot, but certain things that are coming up on the agenda that we can take up as we get there, including the regulation and the legislative packet. So compliance, regulations, the legislative program are coming up. The draft opinion is coming up on the calendar, so we can discuss that in more detail when we get there. Obviously, the compliance continues to work on their reviews. Training, since it is the end of the year, I thought it would be appropriate to let you know that in this year, training did 28 county-wide seminars that were attended by approximately 865 people. They did 9 webinars. They have one more left, none left actually for the rest of this year, but early in next year, and then they will begin very actively hitting 8 counties in January and February to the local counties, how to wind down their campaigns and do that sort of stuff. So they've been busy. With regard to the cases, we have numerous cases that are pending. The most significant updates, and Brian pays closer attention to these than I do, but I think the particular updates that you may be interested in are in the ESIN, which is the website accessibility case. This week we received the plaintiff's response to our prior settlement offer. We are in the process of reviewing that. There seems to be some hurdles that may take a little getting over, but we're going to continue on with.
This is the Association of the Blind?
Yes.
Yep.
We're going to try to, continue to negotiate that. With regard to the Parish of V. Kaczynski case, which is the village petitions, I think it's important to know that we updated the petition form and they are on the website now correctly in accordance with the law and the statute that was passed by the legislature and chaptered by the governor. Let me see. There was an update on Merced, which is, maybe Brian can speak to that, because that case requires the witnesses of independent nominating petitions to be qualified voters in the state. There was argument yesterday, and as of yesterday afternoon, I didn't have an update. Brian sent me what I believe is an update, but maybe he could speak to specifically what they said.
We have made a motion in Merced for summary judgment. The plaintiffs have also made a motion for summary judgment. And the issue is whether or not New York's requirement that a person as a witness to a independent nominating petition be a qualified voter is constitutional. At yesterday's, what would have been an oral argument, there was a motion made by the other side to amend their complaint at this late date, an oral application, and the judge granted it. So the argument on the motions did not proceed, and the plaintiff has a week to amend, and then we will have a period of time after that to respond. The issue with respect to the amendment is pleading a particular plaintiff that is not in the case that we allege should be. So that's where that is, which is the actual corporate entity of the Libertarian Party of New York.
So this is the issue as to whether you have to be even a resident of New York? Is that correct?
Yes.
You could be a non-New York, you could be someone from California.
Pennsylvania.
Come into New York and
New
circulate
Jersey.
petitions for independent candidates.
Correct.
So yesterday's development is procedural, not substantive. The substantive posture of the case and how it's proceeding is as it has been. There's no substantive update.
And not to belabor this, but would that affect all candidates? Is that the position that if I'm running for town board in the town of Bethlehem, I could circulate a petition even though I live in Illinois?
For independent nominating petitions, yes.
It would right down to the local level.
Yes.
So it could have significant impacts, potentially, when it's decided. I think those are the major updates on the cases, and one other mention that we have is that a longtime compliance employee, Patty Lloyd, is retiring after 11 years here, 34 years total with the state. So yesterday was her going away luncheon. She'll be gone at the end of the month. We'd like to wish her well in the next stage for
And on behalf of the board, I'd like to wish her well as well.
And I think that's it, except for the specific items that we have on the rest of the agenda, unless anyone has any questions.
Brian, anything else?
No, there's several items on the agenda. If there are questions.
We'll take those in due time. Okay, then we'll move on. Are there any questions of council? Then we'll move on to the election operations, and I see Tom's here, Brendan's here, and Cheryl, are you filling in for?
I'm not filling in for Tom.
Not just Brendan. Okay, Brendan, you're gonna have to.
Is
carry
there
the
anyone
whole
that
load.
could fill in for Tom? Obviously the number one has been our certification of election results. There was a unit report in your packet. I'll touch on some of the highlights. We've also received, I believe right now, 3 resignations from assembly seats from those that were recently elected in November to other seats. So on top of the overall 11, I believe, vacancies that will occur come January 1st. We also have, further down on the meeting, revision to the language for the automated audit tool, which will be put back out for comment. Tom and I also went to Saratoga to look at the audit tool that Clear Ballot has, that the county has purchased. Tom has also been attending, or is attending, the Council of State Governments National Conference to discuss overseas voting initiative, and the second of 2 meetings for the Center for Internet Security to aid in developing a cybersecurity handbook for states. We have continued our discussion with OGS about the testing lab, also the asset management contract, and I know that there was, under new business, we have the vote to permit Dominion's ice machine to begin certification. As we discuss this further on, this is something that would require a mention at the meeting. They've submitted the paperwork. This is an upgrade to their current BMD that our staff will begin the certification process. Once everything is complete, then that will come back to the board to vote on official certification and getting this machine ready if any county would be interested in purchasing this. We've continued to work on the shoebox funds and work with IT for our campus upgrades and everything also. So if there's any questions about that.
Any questions for Brendan?
So I'm interested in what operations has done in the last month on ballot usability issues.
We have discussed, Tom and I have both spoke with ballot usability experts. We were looking at possibly having someone come to the conference and also update our staff once we got through with the certification and everything else at the very beginning of the new year to come in and do a presentation. We do have literature and information that we have disseminated to the operations staff about ballot usability, best practices, tips, and then we've been going over the specific ballots that counties do submit to us for them as well. So that's an ongoing process, and we're going to be moving towards into the new year with that.
I haven't seen the memo yet, but I hear that Columbia County discovered a usability issue in the course of doing their manual count audit.
There was,
familiar with that? You want to explain?
as of 53 minutes ago, I received something in the mail. It's a paper. I briefly just looked at the front of it, that it was from the commissioners. I do not know what the substance was. It was a letter package that was just delivered today.
My understanding is that they found in looking at, in the course of their manual count, that there were 8 ballots where the candidate for judge had the middle initial O, and the voters filled in the middle initial instead of the target block. So obviously those 8 ballots weren't counted by the machines, And it wasn't a close contest, so it wasn't significant.
Made that mistake.
But it's an interesting usability issue of where that middle initial O actually attracted voters to mark the O instead of the voting block. It's just another example, though, of why I think it's very important that the operations unit track all these examples and sort of build up a database of do's and don'ts, you know, what works and where there are potential problems. It never would have occurred to me that that would be a problem. And I think under our rules, if there were a manual count, it wouldn't have been an issue, that those ballots all would have counted for that person. But yeah, it's just an interesting issue. All right, my last issue is what has operations done in bringing New York City into compliance with the 30-minute rule for the November 2020 general election?
We've had discussions with them. I know that also Todd has spoken with them, and I believe Bob has as well. We
So
have-
concretely, what's happening? Or I'll be frank that as far as I can tell, they're ignoring the issue. In terms of what they can do differently in 2020
send
from
them
what they did in 2016.
We had an original letter.
Unless they do something differently, there's no reason to think we won't have the same problems in 2020 that
Well,
we had in
they
2016.
did something differently. They did it in this election. We know that they've,
Yeah, but the point was in 2016, you're saying they've done something,
well, yeah, they started implementing the plan that they had described to us, you know, primarily looking at the, I'll call it the traffic direction or traffic cop mentality, utilizing the pads that they were there to serve not only for election night reporting, which is an aspect that we're also looking at, but also as a tool to help direct voters to the proper, either proper spot within a poll site or proper poll site in general, and that has been implemented. What we haven't seen was whether, what we don't have is obviously because the election just concluded was what is the follow-up, you know, what is the debriefing on that report, what is the review of how that functioned. So they had implemented the items that they advised us that they would be doing. What I don't have is a report back from them, because they just finished the election, how successful those were. And anecdotally, I don't, given the size of the election, because we know it's, you know, wasn't overwhelming with turnout, I don't know that you're gonna see, you know,
well, it's half,
no anecdotal
it's
incidences
half the
of-
turnout of a presidential.
But there were no
general
reports of
election.
any.
No.
No,
And-
certainly no media reports and none that the city board had indicated, but what they still have to do is go through, you know, they do have a process where they collect complaints during the day and that they log those and complain those. They don't have that, the report from that has not been done because obviously they just have to certify.
is locked. To keep going.
At the last meeting, we talked about having operations send a letter to New York City formally requesting that they give us a plan on how they will come into compliance for November 2020.
Right, well, what we wanted to, yes.
Has
and
that
that's-
happened yet?
The letter, no, because we did have a conversation with them, and what we said would be useful is the letter asking you to tell us, of the stuff you've implemented, how did that work? Do you continue to use that for your plan going forward as you've advised us in the past? So it made more sense to get the report for what they've done already to see if it functioned.
All right, well, I look forward to that for the next meeting, and I will keep this on the list so that we keep talking about it. You know, what I'm looking for is for operations to work with the city for a concrete plan that we really believe will address the long line issues for November 2020.
Okay, are there any other questions of elections operations? No? Okay, then we will move on to NVRA PIO, John Conklin.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Public Information Office has been very busy since the October meeting. Lots of calls about the election, statewide ballot proposals. The CON was very important to a lot of people. The multiple campaign finance filings that have been done as well. In connection with the election, we published legal ads around the state for the general election for the 3 statewide ballot proposals. That was about $67,000, and we've received the tear strips proving that the publications happened. That's a state requirement in the law. As we mentioned at the last meeting, a new law was put on the books requiring the state board to publish a list of campaign websites.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but something I just had a question about. I don't know. I know that prior to the last election, there was discussion here and elsewhere about the ballot props being on the back, the other side, whatever we call it, of the ballot. Are we getting information on what the impact or how that impacted the people's voting on that? Whether we saw a large drop-off in voters voting between candidates and the ballot props?
The Public Information Unit's not collecting information on that. I don't know if election operations is, or...
I think if you look at drop-off compared to lever machines when they were on the face of the machine, same face as the candidates, our tests, our court papers already in the litigation had shown the history since we went to paper ballots. The drop-off had been almost half. I think the standard percentage was about 15% drop-off, and I think we were much lower than that. Or it was almost half what the lever to paper. I think if you look at the election results, since there was a lot of public about turn the ballot over, there was the guidance that we gave to the counties with the information to put on both sides, to review both sides of the ballot. I think it's even come down even more as far as the number of people who just decided.
I guess that's what I was curious. I mean, did we see a change from last time? Not necessarily between lever machines and paper ballots, but from the last time we had a paper ballot proposition, which did we have one last year? I honestly don't remember. 2 years ago to this year, because I know we did make some efforts to try to educate people and to try to make it more apparent to people that they needed to look at both sides. I was wondering if we found success there or not, or what the results of that were.
I don't have the numbers for you today, but I think just looking briefly.
Well, could you, I mean, I understand I just brought this up. So maybe next time, if you could just give us some information on that as to how that impacted this year's vote. I mean, I know there was a substantial amount of attention being paid to this year's ballot props, particularly the one, which also I'm guessing had some impact, but still, I'm curious how much drop-off we had this year compared to other years.
I think there was a much lower number of blanks than in past years on ballot props.
Yes.
That's
So,
right, okay,
yeah.
okay.
That's the point.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's
Go
quite
ahead.
all right.
Yep.
So the unit also participated in the monthly calls with the Election Commissioners Association in October and November. We've been part of the meetings on internal cybersecurity review and assessment. We responded to 75 FOILs in October and 53 in November. Just as a quick aside, a number of those FOILs are asking about voter history, particularly for the September primary. So if my colleagues in the county boards have not submitted their September primary voter history yet, please do that as soon as possible. We've also participated in a number of the calls on the implementation of Executive Order 169. The unit assisted in the preparation of testimony for the Assembly Election Law Committee on November 28th. We also participated in a webinar presentation by the Association of Counties on the basics of cybersecurity for county governments. For the website, a number of these things have been mentioned by other units already. We posted the unofficial election nights for the unofficial election results on election night for the general election. The webcast and the transcript for the October 23rd meeting has been posted. The approved 2018 political calendar has been posted, and an updated model version of the petitions for village elections has also been posted. For NVRA, the unit visited the Oneida County Board, Fulton, Schoharie, Hamilton, and Delaware counties since the last meeting. And we've also conducted trainings for WICS, Social Services, and the Department of Health.
Okay, is that it? Are there any questions for John, any commissioners? Okay, so next we're on to ITU. Bill Cross?
Hi. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'll start off with projects, Capus Vitus. In terms of resourcing, we continue, the project is mostly fully resourced now. We do continue to fill one vacant programmer position. We are also readying a request back to the Office of IT Services for suballocation of the remainder of capital funds for the project. This is a follow-up to the suballocation we received from them earlier this year in May for a portion of the funds to support our hourly contractors. We are now coming towards the end of that fund, so we're issuing a request for the remainder. Stakeholder outreach, we had our third in a series of outreach meetings this month. This one session the past month was with the EFS vendors on November 15th to provide them with the demonstration of the system prototype and discuss data exchange between their systems and the new Capus Vitus system.
I'm sorry, Bill, can you just elaborate on stakeholders?
Stakeholders, so we've had...
Who are you talking about?
We have three defined outreach groups for stakeholders in Capus Vitus development. One is County Board of Elections,
okay.
One is treasurers, and one is EFS vendors. We've had meetings since...
Do you have separate meetings with them, or you
yes.
meet with them together?
We've had separate meetings with them. We had two meetings in September, one with the treasurers, one with the county boards, working groups. And this past month, we had the one with the EFS vendors.
How many people are like treasurers? How many treasurers are you finding participate in this?
I don't have the numbers for the past two. I can share them. For this most recent one, for vendor participants, we invited 19, 10 of which attended, including Aristotle, NTS.
So we have 19 different vendors operating in the state?
19 vendor participants representing
okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, representing only 4. Aristotle attended, NTS, NGP, and the Campaign Finance Board.
Is that the universe of vendors that participate in this arena that do campaign finance in the state? Are there only 4?
No, there's
more.
There's additional.
Okay.
The working groups are comprised of smaller scale.
And treasurers, how are you identifying treasurers that should participate in this particular effort?
I don't recall how the list came.
I think our unit and others, based on recommendations of the agency, identified people that, based on our interactions, we thought would be helpful and useful participants. And there were quite a number, and I think to the point where they couldn't do it all in person. They had to be done so that there was people could participate remotely. So there's no precise formula to it, other than trying to find people who are thoughtful and would do a good job.
I'm just thinking there's a wide variety of people that engage in this,
Mm-hmm.
some professional, some non-professional, many, probably most non-professional, like,
oh, absolutely.
it's fair to say. Yeah. And I'm thinking those are the people who probably need the most help because they're not professionals, and if they can, I'm hoping they're being included. I'm assuming they are in this.
I think it was a broad range of large and small party candidate committees who were asked to participate.
Plus, our staff has participated in, and they're familiar with a lot of the issues that the vast majority of people have.
And certainly, if there's anyone who wants to be in this group, they're welcome to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not an exclusive group.
The sessions have been very productive. We've received very good feedback and comments that have gone into development of the
I
application.
know you provided us with a prototype of what
Yes.
we were looking at. Are you at a point where you can do that again with us so we can see how this is progressing and kind of where we are in development?
For the,
Bill, I don't
I'm
need
not sure. I'll have to
I don't
check.
need an answer right here, but what I want you to know is I'm interested, and I think maybe other commissioners are too, in seeing how this is being developed and
Sure,
what's
absolutely.
being done and how this is going to look as we go forward. Because I have some thoughts. I'm guessing the other commissioners may as well.
Yep.
So I'm interested if you can put
Absolutely.
together some sort of a demonstration
Sure,
for
absolutely.
us.
Yep.
I would be interested.
As a follow-up to the county BOE working group that we held in September, and some previous data collection we had worked with them on, we've updated a survey, an updated set of questions in a survey form for them to determine the type and format of data that they're currently managing at the county level for data. This is mainly in the context of data exchange between their systems and ours in the new system, and to engage them in partnership of knowing to facilitate that data transfer, make it easy for them, but still remain on some kind of standardized basis. That questionnaire, I think, went out this morning to them, so we'll look for some response on that for early January. And then for each of these outreach working groups, we plan follow-up meetings on a fairly regular basis, as needed for input and discussion as development goes along.
So how is the progress? I know we've raised this before, and I'm going to raise it again, I guess. From a time standpoint, where are we from your eyes?
So the schedule hasn't changed. The data I shared before, we're still on track for that. We are staffed. That was our major hurdle in getting the resources in-house. So that's, we've made very good progress with that. We're only vacant one position right now. We are on track for that. That said, there's a good amount of work ahead of us.
Now, that date is spring of 19,
It's April 19th.
so we're still on that. Okay.
That was the last part of that, is all of development continues on track for the EFS use cases, political calendar, data conversion, and associated other pieces.
Okay.
Nysboe, we continue to make significant progress on the upgrade and replacement of our entire network and server infrastructure. Working with the contracted vendor, all new hardware that we for this effort has now been installed in our data centers and BOE offices here. The team has now begun migration of existing systems and databases to that new infrastructure, and implementing enhanced disaster recovery between the sites for failover and for mitigation of issues. The move redevelopment is also progressing, is also continuing, the in-house move application to replace the outsourced application, and that's also on track for the time frame we had identified. Data center relocation is a relatively new project. State Office of IT Services is requiring that we, again, I think I mentioned this one earlier meeting, again, relocate our data center to a new location. We had previously had it postponed because they were looking to do it right smack dab in the middle of election season. They were accommodating and allow us to postpone that. But the discussion was that we would address it after the beginning of the calendar year, so the planning for that effort has now begun. The relocation, even though it's relatively short distance, it's from one building to another on the SUNY CNEC campus, still requires significant planning preparation. So we've just started that effort right now with them. A few security things have been mentioned. I think Bob mentioned that we put significant effort into the preparation of systems and monitoring contingency plans for general election, and I'm also happy to report there was no issues encountered. We closely watch traffic. We've had this year, due to improvements we have a much better visibility into a lot of that traffic and a lot of what's going on through things we've implemented and through partners and saw no activity that was suspicious at all. As CIO, I participated in the assembly testimony on cybersecurity and elections. I related during that session that we continue to work on several security enhancements, like intrusion detection and system monitoring, access management, but only some of this work is possible within the scope of existing projects. The majority of that will require the additional funding we requested as part of the BOE budget. BOE is also now joined with the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It's a mouthful, also known as the MSISAC, enabling us to have direct access to timely cybersecurity information from a variety of sources, and direct access to a federal Homeland Security portal. We were previously receiving most of this information, at least we think, through third parties or passed down through state police or state IT. We are now a direct member and we receive it immediately, which has proven beneficial to have that very quickly. And we continue to work with Nysboe to finalize the risk assessment for the state and county boards, and I think we have a final draft of that report that we're reviewing right now. That's all.
Okay, that's good. Any questions for Bill?
Oh, I neglected. Was going to mention some just website analytics. As expected, the website traffic increased significantly around general election. Voter lookup site accommodated over 500 page views for the period immediately surrounding general election, and about 90,000 for election night reporting. These are significantly lower than the period last year, obviously, about 1/6, but nevertheless are a significant amount of traffic bump from normal traffic.
Okay.
No, that's it.
Thank you. Now any questions? No questions? Okay, then we will move on to enforcement. Risa Sugarman.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I would just mention that I did have a meeting with one of my staff members, with Bill and Bob and Todd, as to the requests that the division would have in the new system as to how we could request data and information and reports in Capus Vitus, or the new name, I'm not sure what it is. So that we'll be working with Bill and his staff to make sure that we can access the information and reports that we would need to help our inquiries and investigations. And that's all the information that I have, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions? No, I guess not. Okay. Then we will move on to old business. Under old business, we have 2 items. We'll take the first item, which is the automated audit tool. As I understand it, its current status is that we had adopted a policy or a regulation. It was then put out for public comment. We then received, I believe, numerous public comments. And the regulation has been redrafted to reflect those public comments. And this today is to put it back out for another 30-day public comment period?
Correct. Yes.
After publishing.
After publishing.
After publishing.
Is that correct? Is that where we are?
Yes. We will vote today. Council's office will work with them to publish it in the state registrar, and then from that publication period.
Do you
we'll have
want
30 days.
to explain some of the changes that were made to reflect the public comments that were made?
Sure. What we received the comments shortly before the question period. The specific new language has been added and is underlined in the in here, and it basically talks about how we're going to use the cast vote record. We're going to give that information to anyone that's obviously going to be attending the audit, so they can use this. The manual comparison of ballots is still going to be there as well. The standard 3% audit. And then it goes on to further talk about the results between the audit and the voting system results, and making sure that everything matches up and the audit does what it's supposed to do. So this is currently there. The information will be out there, will be published on our website, so if there are any additional comments, people can certainly make those as well.
I move the adoption of the resolution.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Then that is adopted, and that will be put out for comment as soon as you can get it published.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like watching an old movie.
He's a little
Yeah,
late.
yeah,
I should hesitate, Commissioner, to wait for your input. I'm sorry.
For those of us who can read his lips, we got it fast.
Well, I can't, so I'll have to wait. So when do you anticipate this coming back? I guess that's my other question.
I believe the last time it took 2-3 weeks before it was put into publication.
Right. One of it depends partially on workflow, but more typically the issue is just where in the filing cycle that we land. And I haven't looked at it as of today, but we do understand that it is important to move this along as quickly as possible, given the fact that there are imminent elections coming and people really want to use this. So I would anticipate that we'll make the required filings with the Department of State Monday and advance the process as quickly as we can.
Okay. Okay, good.
And,
All right.
and I would be willing to consider putting these in place on an emergency basis if there are specific elections where it would be necessary.
And that could be entertained at your
Because I
next
think
meeting.
this has
Okay.
now been pretty thoroughly vetted.
It's been vetted pretty widely. I agree with you, and I don't want to hold people up. So if we need to do that potentially at the next board meeting, because this is being delayed by publication, I think we would entertain that if you guys see that happening.
Okay.
So let us know.
Okay.
All right, so that finishes that. Then the second item is the designation of treasurer removal committee. We had to promulgate a regulation to implement that new statute, and my understanding is this is now in its final stage. This has been put out for public comment. I don't believe we got any public comment. Or is that fair to say or no?
That is correct.
Okay, so we are now seeking to adopt this as well.
I move the adoption of the resolution.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? And that is also adopted. So those two items are done. And we will now move on to new business. Now, our first item, I believe, Brendan, you indicated is not for board action. That is
Correct.
happening at the
Yes.
staff level?
Yep.
Which is
And
fine.
just to comment on that, on one or two occasions, the commissioners have voted to authorize the initiation of testing, but in each of those cases, there were specific reasons why the board was involved in the development of the product. But ordinarily, if a vendor submits an application, it gets processed, and the commissioners don't act until they're ready to submit a certification with all the test results and a full report from the
I mean, that makes sense to me. There's no need for us to
That's a
adopt. If they want, because they're paying for this, they're then going to give us their results, and we'll decide whether they warrant approval.
Mhm.
And that's when we would get involved, correct?
Once the certification is what you would call it.
Fair enough. Okay, so that is off, and we'll move on to the second item, which is an opinion. Now, this I will speak to because I am interested in this topic. This is an opinion that was drafted by staff, some staff here, and I can't say there's full agreement at this point, but it's an issue that was raised in the context of an article in a website, Politico specifically, which spoke to an interpretation of a new law that the state has about independent expenditures and when a filing requirement is triggered. And I I believe that there was some information in there that I felt was misleading, I'll say, or incorrect in the interpretation that I have certainly of how that statute is to be implemented. And I felt that because of that, it deserved our attention. It deserves us to do an opinion, to clarify what we think the rule is regarding the obligation of people engaged in independent committees to make filings here at the State Board. So this is an effort to do that. I don't know that we have full agreement on what's in this
Not
specific
quite
draft,
yet, but
I'm
I
hoping-
think it's a pretty good draft.
Okay.
It's a good start.
Okay.
But we have some comments that we'd like to add, and we've only had it a few days now.
Okay, fair enough.
So we'd like to circulate it, and I thank you for initiating.
Okay, so I would ask that the staff continue to work on this. And just for public, I don't want to leave everybody wondering what it is.
Yeah,
It was
go
an article that was issued back in October about activities that were engaged in by some committees, specifically on the Constitutional Convention question, but it's clearly a broader issue than that. And it involves the ability of groups to communicate with their own members, and there was a provision in the new statute that if you are merely communicating with your own members, you do not trigger a filing requirement here at the State Board. But if you are communicating with the general public and you are communicating with more than 500 people, then you do trigger a filing requirement. Well, there was some effort to explain that the independent or the internal group was disseminating products that I believe under any guise would be for the purpose of public disclosure. That would not be something you would keep, for example, a lawn sign. My view is you don't give people a lawn sign as an internal communication. That is clearly, in my mind, meant to be publicly displayed, and so you're reaching far outside your internal group when you're disseminating information like that, and that should be viewed in that context. So while you may be communicating internally, it's being done with an eye towards communicating with the general public. So I felt there was some clarification needed on that. That's the context that this is being discussed in. So I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, so hopefully by the next meeting, we can have an agreed upon opinion that we could issue and clarify the rules for that particular activity.
Can I just
Sure.
say that I absolutely agree with you on this? When I read that article,
Okay.
I went, yeah, no, that's not what the intent of 14-107, and I'm glad that you brought this up.
Okay, good.
Have you gotten the draft?
I got it, yes, I got it before, a couple of days ago, so.
So you need to work on it as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, if you have
So,
input, let us know.
It's a good idea that this,
Okay.
that was not the intent of the statute, and I'm glad that you're looking at that.
Okay. Good. So then we will move on to our final item, which is the legislative packet for 2018, and that's been given to us by counsel's office. Do you want to speak to it?
Could I just ask
Sure.
some questions about
Sure.
1806, which we did recommend last year, and I don't believe either house took it up. We're recommending a requirement that treasurers complete a 3-hour course and a biennial update. You committed to that?
Well, I mean, I'd have to look, maybe I need to look at the language more specifically. I think that in this state,
It makes it harder to recruit treasurers.
well, it does. I mean, in this state, as we spoke earlier, a lot of our treasurers
And-
are volunteers.
And how comfortable would you feel if you were mandated that you had to spend 3 hours after being an elections commissioner and enforcement counsel? That
That I'm not teaching the course, you mean, that I should be?
No, well, that's exactly
I got you.
that's my point,
I
is
got
that
you.
we're mandating that everybody have to put 3 hours into this every 2 years. And I'm just,
Fair enough.
I'm willing to take it out. I'm not going to vote no just because it's in there, because the legislature, but I don't think there's much interest in the legislature in doing this. And I'm a little queasy about a blanket mandate that people have to spend time after we're already asking them for time to volunteer as treasurer. All right.
Fair enough. I think that's a fair concern, and I would ask the councils to look at that one. Maybe we should revisit that as to whether that's a legitimate idea. Maybe it causes more harm than good. I understand the theory that if you have some training, you'll be better at being a treasurer, which is good. But I also understand the potential that you'll discourage more and more people from being treasurers, which is bad, because I think candidates already have trouble finding treasurers. So if you have this imposition of a new requirement on them, it may make it just that much more difficult to find treasurers, which isn't good.
Would it be more acceptable if the biennial component were removed?
It would be,
Hours is a problem.
to me, the remedial training to be ordered is acceptable. In other words, that's addressing somebody who's, but I would prefer to leave it optional on whether you get training. That's my preference.
That's
As I
legitimate.
say,
So take the word must out and make it.
Well, we already provide training opportunities for treasurers,
That's what I'm
right? I mean, we already make it available that if you want it, you can have it by these training sessions.
There is there's in the last section of last year's bill or portion, there is the option that in the context of where a treasurer has done something wrong, that a court can order remedial training and the enforcement council can request it. So that was sort of the three concepts that are in there. There was an initial training, biennial training, and then this potential that training could be ordered as part of remedy. Those are the three elements that are in it. And I think Commissioner Kellner indicated the first two are problematic, and the third,
For me,
not so much. Yeah.
yeah.
The third sounds reasonable.
I think we should revisit the whole, in the whole context, maybe we can just revisit the whole issue.
Okay, so we're moving.
But I think
for
having
now.
the ability to have a court order,
I think they can do that anyway.
okay, maybe they can. I don't know, frankly, but okay.
And as to the numerous new items, I thank staff for collecting all these little issues over which I think there's consensus that would be good for the legislature to revise these provisions.
Well, some of them are just cleanups,
That's right.
you know, reflecting court decisions that have occurred that we're already following, but the statute's not been changed, and that's unfortunate, because people reading the statute are misinformed, and that's bad, so.
We get a lot of phone calls, though, based on what it says versus
Sure.
what we do,
I'm sure
so
you
it'll
do.
help to
It
streamline
would,
that.
and I think those are the ones I would prioritize, simply because having wrong information in our statute is bad, and I think there's very little argument for why that should be retained, and we should make every effort to clean that up.
Well, we still haven't quite succeeded in getting the legislature to agree to take the trustees of the LIPA, and we haven't had trustees of LIPA elected in a decade, but we did fix the fact that we have judicial, 13th Judicial District, and considering that the chairman of the committee came from Staten Island, I think that helped us, so. And now that we have a chairman of the committee from Long Island, maybe the LIPA thing will get cured, I don't know.
Okay.
So with that one revision deleting 1806, I move the adoption of the report.
Is there any discussion? Do I have a second? Second,
And-
so,
And then let me just say for the record that these are the list of items in which there is a broad consensus among the staff and the commissioners that reflects bipartisan agreement. Obviously, each of the commissioners have other items that we would personally add to the agenda, Certainly, I endorse the governor's proposals for early voting and for easing registration requirements. The Assembly has passed year after year bills providing for electronic poll books, where just 2 words are necessary to authorize that important innovation. And certainly I support legislation that would end the LLC loophole. And there are dozens of other items that could be added to that list. But this is the consensus list that we all agree on, and I'm glad that we're getting it out in a timely fashion for this next session of the legislature.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed. All right, so the proposals will be sent to the legislature for their consideration in the upcoming session. And that is the end of the agenda, unless anybody else has anything they want to bring up. I believe we have agreed upon a next meeting on January 22nd.
Great.
We will be meeting again. It's our next scheduled meeting. And with that in mind, I would ask that we entertain a motion to adjourn from public session and go into executive session for purposes of considering an enforcement matter.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. We will not be coming back into public session for anyone who's here for that following our executive session. And happy holidays.